Hello, everyone, and welcome to Seafood Matters, and thank you for joining us again. Today, I'm delighted to welcome Linda Fitzpatrick, Curator of the Scottish Fisheries Museum in Anstruther. The museum is one of the great guardians of Scotland's fishing heritage, preserving the boats, the gear, photographs, and above all else, the stories of the men and women who built our coastal communities. Linda joins me to explore what that heritage can teach us about the past, the present, and the future of Scottish fishing. Hello, Linda, and welcome to Seafood Matters.
Hi, Jim. It's great to be here.
Thank you. Thank you. I've really looked forward to this conversation. I've got huge respect for what you do down there. Linda, can you please explain to our listeners, just pick off, the importance of the Scottish Fisheries Museum and what makes it unique and such a special place?
Well, that's quite a big question to start off with, and it's quite a big museum. If you've visited, you'll know that it's grown from a very small start, founded by members of the fishing community themselves back in the 1960s. And it started off just as a wee museum, and it's grown and grown and grown because the story of the fishing industry in Scotland is such a big and complicated story. If you're talking about all the different roles that the fishing members of the fishing community had, catching the fish, obviously, and then all the work that was done on shore to process the catch, to prepare the gear, to sell it on, to market it, take it all around the world, and then all the equipment and the tools that people had, and the communities that grew up around that and around the coasts. It's a really big story to tell. And I think Scotland, it's inconceivable to think of Scotland without a fishing industry. So it's a really important story that people needed to capture when they captured it, because it was changing really fast in the 1960s, and need to keep capturing it and keep telling it, because as we all know, the numbers of people who are employed in the fishing industry now has declined, but it's still an important industry within Scotland, and we still got that really long coastline and all of those communities that owe so much of their heritage and their culture to fishing. We need to keep telling that story. And I think the museum is a unique place. It's in a unique set of buildings. It's right by the harbour. It's grown, as I say, over the years, so it's kind of got that kind of handmade feel to it, which obviously fishing was handcrafted for so much of its time, and that real community feel. And I think that's really important to preserve.
Absolutely. Absolutely. If I could ask you, sitting in the museum looking over the harbour, what like is the sunrise
Uh, Sunrise,
or
don't often
sunset?
sunset. Um, yeah, amazing. Yeah,
I can just picture
both of
that.
them.
It must
Yeah,
be stunning.
yes, yeah. We're right on the mouth of the Firth of Forth, so the sun rises right over the mouth of the Firth, and then obviously
Yeah,
sets over Edinburgh way. So
yeah.
it's a great view.
What attracted you to the world of fisheries heritage and museum work before joining your museum? Where did your career take you?
Well, I have to confess at this point that I don't have a background in fishing myself at all. I grew up next to the sea in East Lothian, but my family are not a fishing family. So I am a total newcomer to this, or I was a newcomer to this when I came to the museum. My passion was always history, and mainly I would say the history of people and how people lived their lives, and how they in the past solved the same problems that we're trying to solve in our own lives today. Um, I find it fascinating to find out how people lived in the past, how very different they were from us, and how very much the same they were from us now. So I studied history at university up in Aberdeen. And then I took a couple of years out and I went abroad and I did some teaching and discovered that teaching was not for me. And then I did some office work and bits and pieces and decided actually what I wanted to do was share my passion for history with people through working in a museum. And I think coming to the Fisheries Museum, that's the museum that has given me all of those aspects that I wanted to bring into a working career of doing the research, telling the stories, connecting with people, and yes, doing a bit of the teaching element as well, but not in a classroom. That's where I am, and I came in very much as somebody who didn't have a clue about the industry, but I'd relied very heavily on our volunteers and our community here to keep me right on that side of things.
That's a great story. And really, Linda, okay, everybody doesn't know. There's no, well, we maybe come across a few people in our days who know everything. There are just a chosen few. So but what I read out of that, okay, there's parts that you were low on, but you've taken something to the museum.
Yeah, I think it's being interested. I think I do find history and the past inherently fascinating, and I really would like to share that with people. People who say that history is not important, or why do I need to know about the history? We're living here and now. Well, how can you understand the here and now if you don't know where it's come from? How
Yeah.
can you solve the problems you're facing if you don't know how people in the past have approached the same things? And you might be missing a trick if you don't look to the past to see how things were done back then.
And you're very fortunate to be in a position or a situation, I should say, where you're now doing what you've wanted to do. That's lovely.
It is.
That's
It
special.
is. Yeah. Yeah. I do most days feel very lucky to be doing the job that I'm doing.
Yeah, yeah, excellent. Are there memorials or stories in the museum that particularly affect you personally?
It's striking you use the word memorial because we do have a memorial room within the museum, and that is dedicated to fishermen and lifeboatmen who have lost their lives at sea. And to me, one of the most poignant things in the museum is where you get a brass plaque up on the wall and you see the names of every member of a crew who's gone down with a vessel. And then you look a bit closer and you realize that a lot of the surnames are the same. And you realize that that's members of the one family. And that to me is that shows the impact that the fishing industry can have on families and communities because the men went on the boats together with their family and they owned the boats together and it was that shared endeavour. And of course then you've got the families waiting at home waiting for them to come back safe, and that crew didn't come back safe. And I think that particularly when you've got people who actually come, which they do fairly regularly, come to pay their respects to their relatives. And we've got plaques from all over, so people do come from all over. And just being able, being able to provide that service of somewhere where they can come and pay their respects, whether that's an individual visit or whether it's we have an annual memorial service as well. But then just seeing that, even a couple of generations on, that tragedy is still having an impact on that family, and I do find that very affecting.
But it must be for that families that have the plaques there in that room. What a special place it is for them.
I hope so. I hope so. I mean, we keep it going, and we keep the memorial service going every year because it is important to honour that. Yeah, fishing is a very dangerous job still.
Yeah. I'm not wanting to take anything away from the memorial room, but when you mention same names in it, there's two. It brings to mind two things. One, I remember a woman from the Seafish organization. She went up to Peterhead to do some. She had some meetings and things to do. She I was speaking to her after that, and she says that the funny thing, what she says, she had a brilliant day. She met over 20 people, but the funny thing about it, they were all Buchans and Strachans.
Yes. Oh,
And I,
here they're all Muirs and Watsons, but yes.
and my own situation, a small fishing village, Helmsdale, I'm from. Cowie's, Jim Cowie is my name. James is my, as I call my Sunday name. As you know, Jim in Scotland is short for James. When we were in school, there was only 250 pupils in the class, in the school. My older brother was David Cowie. Now, I don't know if it's the same goes into it now, but the older brother was called after the father's, on the father's side. And then the next was called on the mother's side. So David's called after his father's father. I'm called after my mother's father. So he's David Cowie. I'm James Cowie. When we were in school, there was nine David Cowies and seven James Cowies.
Yeah. Yes. It's either very traditional or a severe lack of imagination, I would say.
Have you any hidden gems in the collection that gets overlooked? What's the oldest or most unusual object in your museum?
Well, I don't know if it's the oldest object in the museum. It's certainly the oldest piece of fish I've ever seen. We have a piece of dried fish hanging up in one of our galleries, just showing how fish was dried. That has been there certainly as long as I've been at the museum, which is over 20 years now. And it was reputed to be about 20 years old at that point.
Wow.
So I wouldn't like to sample it now, but it's still it's still hanging on the wall. Um, yeah, that's quite an unusual one. My favourite object in the museum is actually slightly tangential to fishing. It's actually a harpoon. It's the head of a cast iron or wrought iron harpoon head from the 19th century, and it was used for whaling. And before you say it, I know a whale is not a fish, but the Fishery Board for Scotland actually, that was set up in the 19th century to superintend fisheries, they covered whaling as well. So I think when the museum was set up, it was decided that the museum would cover whaling as well. And one of our buildings actually was owned by a whaling company, so there's a connection there. But the object itself is it's the shaft, the iron shaft of the harpoon with the barb to point, and it's been twisted into a corkscrew shape, and that was done while it was stuck in the side of a whale. And to me, it's a rather gruesome object when you think about it. But it's just to think of, on the one end of that was a creature fighting for its life, twisting and turning in the water. On the other end, on the end of a piece of rope, was a small boat with 4 or 5 men in it, clinging on for grim death up in the Arctic seas. And just as an object that tells, as a single object that tells a story, I think it's a really powerful object. You know, you've got this, what's the one piece of twisted metal, and suddenly
Yeah.
this whole tale
Wow.
comes out of it.
That's amazing. That's fantastic. The funny when you mentioned the dried fish, Linda, anytime dried fish is mentioned, it takes me back to a situation I had. I did a lot of business in the Faroe Islands and used to go there a lot. Loved going there. Great people. And it's I think to my dying days, I'll take the memory with me. There's a skipper, an owner of a boat. I go and see him, visit him. I'm sitting in the sitting room. You can just picture it. I'm sitting in the sitting room, his sitting room. His family are there. There's children and some of the children's friends. We had you can imagine, a coffee table with bites like biscuits or cake and that with our coffee and plates of sweets. They were crazy for every time they were fishing, one of their boats would come to Scrabster. We would be putting on board hundreds, literally hundreds of tins of Macintosh, chocolates, Quality Street, all that, tins of them, hundreds of tins of them. And they were all spread out on the coffee table. And there was dried fish on plates as well. All this was a spread in the coffee tables. I kid you not, Linda, the children were taking the dried fish,
Wow.
not the sweets. Can you imagine that in this country?
No. In a word, no.
I've never got my head around that.
No. No, it's interesting that you've just reminded me that one of the things that's great about working behind the scenes at the museum, because obviously we've got a much bigger collection than we can actually show at any one time, and we've got lots of books from ship's chandlers and the suppliers who supplied the boats. And one of the things that always amazes me is the number of tins of condensed milk that went aboard these boats.
Yeah.
And yeah, just to keep the crew going, just all the condensed milk. So
Yeah.
sweet tooth.
I'll tell you a story about I'll tell you a story about condensed milk. My experience, let's put it different. My experience with condensed milk. All I ever wanted to do as a child is be out on my father's boat. It was a family boat. Be out at sea. And when we were out there fishing between the hauls, they would have a mug of tea. And I was getting the carnation milk in my tea. And my uncle, who's obviously, it was all father and his brothers that had the boat. And one of them, my uncle's, he had a small bottle of milk. He took a piece with him every day, and he had a small bottle of milk. So I just, when I saw it, picture, I'm maybe up 10 would be the oldest I was then. And I says to him, "Oh, Uncle Jim, you don't use, you use cow's milk." "No, no, no, no," he says, "I don't take cow's milk. I use bull's milk." And we got home, we landed at home, landed, I was home in the house, and next morning my mother sent to me at the breakfast table, "And how did it go?" "Oh, it was great, this, and I says, "Mum, Uncle Jim doesn't." And I told her the story. And I often wondered, which although it never went any further, I often wondered if there was through the bongo drums, "What are you saying to our children?" So anyway, moving on, the true price of fish, the title of the book, exclusively available. Your book, sorry, exclusively available in the museum. That takes me back as well to my childhood. The very title, it's means so much to me, Linda, and I'll tell you why. When we were kids, the ship to shore or the radio, we could put on the radio on the long wave and listen to the boat talking on the big sets. And we just loved that. And then would maybe news, it would come to man overboard, boat sank, all hands, whatever. And my mother, so from a tot right up, my mother would always say, "That's the true price of fish."
Mm-hmm.
So when I see the title of your book, I just, wow, it just takes me back to that. And what a fantastic book it is. Well
Oh,
done.
thank you, thank you. I mean, it's such a rich story to try and encapsulate. And it's very difficult to do, even within a museum of this size, and even more so within a book. But we're just so lucky with the collections that we have and the generosity of people over the more than 50 years that the museum's been around. Just because the vast majority of our collections are donated, so we're
Uh-huh.
reliant on the generosity of people bringing those things in and sharing them with us, and then we can share them with our visitors, of course.
Well, I think it's fantastic the way that goes, all the different methods of fishing, different boats, and going right back to when you with the sail. They're just amazing. So the photos are fantastic.
Yeah, I love our photo collection. Actually, it's one of my favourites. There's always new things to discover within it. Whether it's, I mean, it's quite difficult to photograph men actually at work out at sea because they're busy working. They're not going to take the camera out and start taking photographs. But some of the community aspects, and how even the children are involved, as you were talking, as you were saying, going down to the harbour and helping get the catch onto the quayside, and getting the boats bakes as the steamers went down to Yarmouth, and all of these things are captured in the photographs.
I mean, and then I mean, I remember coming across one of them when the motor power the page, and there's a wee note in it about Kelvin, petrol or paraffin, and it says 60 horsepower. Well, my going back to our family boat, it was it was 54 foot, which is, it would go into the fish room of some of the modern boats. They're so much bigger. But as far as we were concerned, we thought she was a battleship. Jesus. And it had a Kelvin 88 horsepower Kelvin. So that's taken me back to that. And when you think of, I've spoken to some fishermen with the modern boats, and they're into the 2000 and 88 horsepower.
I know, and some of the sizes of these old engines. We've got an old Gardner engine, and it's 2 meters long, and I don't know what the horsepower is, but it's less than 88. Um, just crazy how
Well,
things have moved on in the technology and the mechanization.
that's well done on the book. I think it's fantastic. I don't know if you talk along with some of the other uh, museums, but I've got one from Helmsdale, which obviously where I'm from, and they've got the Time Span Museum,
Yes, yeah, I know it. Yeah.
and they've got a book out now, poetry of people and the sea. And I have to have a confession to make, Linda. I've I've gone over and over the most stunning photos. I haven't read a poem yet. That's a terrible admission. But have you ever seen the one from Lossiemouth? Andrew Campbell, just a lossy loon.
I haven't seen that one. No.
Ah, it's brilliant. It's brilliant because Andrew Campbell was such a successful fisherman in his day. I can remember Andrew. I've spoken to him. In fact, I'll tell you a wee story about him. I was back in night. I can tell you exactly when it was. 1971. We got married. Mary and I. We're now 55 years married. We were in honeymoon in Oban. Now a lot of the we call them INS because that's the register, the port
Yeah.
letters for lossy boats was INS. Inverness. We used to say INS was I never sleep. And
That's a good one.
so our honeymoon was in Oban, and a lot of the lossy boats then, I mean, Lossiemouth had the biggest sea net fleet in the country, and a lot of them fished out of Oban. So if you think of here's the situation. First or second night of our honeymoon, we're in bed, and I hear chug, chug, chug. I'm out the bed, out the window, binoculars, and I see the INS 60, I think 66, I think. And here's me watching the boat. One of the first nights of in bed of our honeymoon. And a number of years later, Andrew was up at another fisherman's funeral, Nori Bremner, which I'm sure you know of, the boy Andrew. He passed away, and we're at his funeral, and I spoke to Andrew, and I told him that story, and he, in his broad, lossy accent, aye, aye, that's my boat. So yeah, that would be. Do the museums speak together?
Yeah, yeah, we're quite. All museums are different. They're all there's all manner of different ways of setting up a museum, but we're pretty good at getting together. We've also got for heritage vessels. There's an organisation. Well, there's National Historic Ships UK down in London, and they have a kind of a network of shipshape. They call it shipshape hubs, and we are the shipshape hub for Scotland. And so through that, we try to connect with all the historic vessel operators. So there's kind of museum networks, and then there's the historic vessel networks. So we try to be quite well connected, and and swap stories. And for example, there might be a museum that's going through its collection and finds that there's something that it's got that it doesn't feel that sits very well with it, so they might offer it to us, or we might have something that we think actually we've got duplicates of that. Would it be better in another museum? So there's that kind of conversation goes on a fair bit.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah,
it's good to collaborate and cooperate where we can.
totally. Fishing in industry and coastal communities, they do sometimes feel ignored. But how do you find the importance of preserving their history, even although they feel that they're ignored? You obviously make a great job of showing that they're important.
Well, we try to. I mean, as I said earlier, I think the history of I can't imagine Scotland without fishing. There's so much coastline for a start. There's so many fishing harbours, but I think it is quite easy to overlook. I think somebody has called it sea blindness. People don't even they see the sea as a kind of just a blue expanse on the horizon. They don't actually think of it as an environment where people have their livelihoods and work, whether that's in fishing or in all the other industries that utilize the sea and its resources. So I think that's changing. For example, the city of Dundee, which we're quite close to, for years and years there was no development along the waterfront. The waterfront was just used as a motorway, as a kind of a road network, just to get in or out of Dundee. And I think they've, over recent decades, they've thought actually we need to make much more of the waterfront. It's a great amenity, it's a great resource. So they're developing that and trying to make more of the fact that they are a city that's on the banks of the River Tay. And I think for people just in general, there is a reawakening of awareness of the importance of the coast and the sea, whether that's for health and well-being, whether it's for generating money, if it's the inshore fisheries industry and that kind of luxury seafood market that is so much of the story that Scotland tells to the rest of the world. Come and visit us. We've got all this wonderful seafood. And then you've got other people who are farming seaweed or farming shellfish and trying to kind of look at new ways of exploiting coastal waters and coastal habitats. So it's a difficult one because the fishing industry, I think it's because the boats are way out at sea and they're beyond the horizon. People don't see it. They don't see that work that goes on. They just see the end result. And also it's a lot less visible than it used to be in the past because the boats are much bigger, so and everything's enclosed, and then they'll come into harbour and the factories, the processing is all done in enclosed buildings where it used to be done outside or in people's own homes or in the yards outside their homes or whatever. It's easier to ignore it, but I think it is still so much of a part of who we are as a country and as a culture. It's a difficult one.
Yeah. But no, I
But then
think
everybody goes for their fish and chips, don't they? Everybody still loves to eat their fish and chips, but maybe not to think about too much about where that's come from. So it's bridging that gap between the end product and how it's actually got there.
Yeah, I think they were better in the past at accepted at acknowledging where their fish was coming from.
Yeah,
I feel that anyway.
Yeah, there were more people employed in the industry as well, because as you were saying, the boats were smaller, so there were more of them. So maybe
But
it was just a bit more visible.
but before, as the boats were, they're always maybe in some bigger than that. But one of the conversations, Linda, another conversation I'll never ever forget. I'm on the pier in Scrabster. The skipper, the boat had just landed. A really well known and well respected Orkney fisherman, Albert Reid, standing there after he landed. We've sorted everything out, chatting away. But you hear this one. He says to me, "Well, Jim, it's all very well for you. We could stand here in the harbour here and chat for the rest of the day." But he says, "There's a bad forecast, and I want to get out to sea because I don't want to get stuck in here." So boats might have been made of steel, but so are the men.
Aye, yes.
That's a lasting memory for me. Linda, what can museums gather and protect better than statistics and government reports?
I think that has to be the personal stories that people bring. Just this afternoon, actually, we had a chap come in, and he was 90, and he handed in to me the Gansey that his grandmother, who died in 1949, had knitted for him for his first trip to the sea. And he was going to sea from Port Seaton. He would have worn that Gansey when he was 17 years old. And he wore it, on a a string of fishing boats, which I can't remember the names of now, but I scribbled them down as fast as I could when he
Yeah.
was talking to me. And it's beautiful. I mean, it's exquisite. The fine detail of the stitching. He said he loaned it to a friend who probably washed it a bit too hot and it shrunk a wee bit, so it's a little bit felted, but it's pristine. And it's that kind of story behind that Gansey that no book will tell you that. And that was a Fisher Row fishing family, and likewise, the names had gone down the generations. And he also had his grandfather's sea boot stockings that she had also knitted. And if you don't get the story, it's a pair of socks. If you get the story, then then there's a story you can tell, and you can see where the heels have been mended, and she's been in between his trips to sea, she's been quickly darning the heels of his socks to get him back out again and keep him dry and warm. And that's from a conversation, and that's the kind of story or bit of information that you won't find in any of the reports. And the reports are important because the number of boats that there are, and number of boats that there were, and the catches and how they were processed and where they all went to. That's really important when you're getting a picture of the national industry and how it's ebbed and flowed, and the different ups and downs of the pelagic versus the demersal. All of that is important to understand, but it's the stories that people bring that bring it to life. And I think museums can do that, and we do that by telling those stories on labels, but we also have recordings that people can listen to as they go around the museum. So, they can pick up a headset and listen to somebody in their own words talking about what it was like to be out there on those boats, using the equipment that people can see as they go around.
I'll quote you this verse, Linda. Pull the thread at the bottom and ravel a fisher's tale, a scratchy yet soft reminder of when boys were grown at sea. That's a poem, a Gansey behind glass. It's the book from, that I mentioned to you, Poetry of People and the Sea from Timespan Museum. I spoke to them today, Linda. I've got a copy to send to you.
Fantastic.
And there's a poem and photo of 3 guys in their Ganseys, but they all had Ganseys. We all had Ganseys. And that's not to be forgotten. I think it's fantastic that you haven't. How does the museum acknowledge the importance of fishing in Scotland's history?
I think by trying to show all those different aspects. I think by trying to show it's not just the guys out on the boat, not that that's not important, the guys on the boats actually catching the fish, but it's much wider than that. And it's the fact that there were women involved, there were children involved, there were men, there were people onshore and offshore. There were the guys, the factories making the oilskins and the nets, and the boys and the sails and building the boats. And it was a whole, industry, and then concentric circles of industry that came out of that. And we don't try and tell a simple story, and we don't try to answer all the questions either, because the more you look into it, as with anything, I imagine, but the more you look into it, the more complex and interesting and nuanced a story it is. And we try to do that justice within our displays and also within our temporary exhibitions. So as I said, we've got many more things in our collection than we can show at any one time. So we have a programme of temporary exhibitions, and within that programme we'll try to have a focus, for example, on Ganseys or on artwork, or on some of the technical aspects. We had a recent one on the impact of steam power and the railways, because it was the anniversary of the railways in Britain. And these, looking at the stories from different angles and picking out different aspects, means you can delve into things in a little bit more detail and bring out another kind of aspect of the nuance, and also maybe interest people who have an interest in knitwear, so they'll come for that, and then they get interested in the story of the fishing industry, or they've got an interest in steam engines and steam locomotives and trains, so they'll come for that, and then they'll get an interest in the fishing industry because they haven't realized that, you know, the two go together. So I think it's trying to show the entirety of it, while knowing that we'll never quite manage it.
The thing that I like, I see it in your book, which I'm pleased about, and as part of that story, and it's the women as well as the men, although they had hard lives, hard work, that, as my own granny has told me in the past, they had some great times and they were so happy. They had so much fun as well. And
Yeah,
I see some of your photos. There's fishermen smiling, which I think is, and holding a big halibut or something like that, something special. So
exactly. Yeah, I think, well, it's any job or any kind of occupation or situation where things are tough. You've got to find the humor, haven't you? It's like that kind of, it's almost like gallows humor. But if you've got a hard working life, then you take the opportunities to have a bit of a laugh. And there's a fantastic photograph that we've got of one of the boats with Brighter Hope, that we've got objects that relate to that boat. And there's a photograph of the crew, and they're just holding up things that they had to hand, and they're posing like a skiffle group on board the boat with, like, a barrel lid for a banjo, and it's just mad. But they're obviously just taking a
yeah,
2 minute break from hauling on the lines just to be daft for a minute. And I think the women as well, it is such a contradiction, because they worked so hard, and yet you hear the stories about the herring gutters who would go down to Yarmouth, and they say, oh, but it was so much fun, and we would go to the pictures, and we would hang out with our friends, and I think we forget now that how unusual that was for
yeah,
a gang of young women to go off together, traveling halfway down the country, staying in lodgings, or together wherever they were, working, earning their own money, having their free time, being able to go to the pictures, being able to go to the Fisherman's Mission, or go and window shop in the great resort town of Great Yarmouth, and then have their earnings at the end of the season to take back on the train with them. And they did have that freedom, and they had that independence, as well as working very, very hard for it.
yeah, yeah. And obviously, as you say, fishing has always been a very dangerous profession. But I think museum, with what you've mentioned earlier, the memorial room, a great way of acknowledging its losses.
Yeah, as I say, I hope so. The visitors book is quite interesting to read, because a lot of our visitors do comment and say, well, they bring up those 2 points. They bring up the point that they now realize the value of the fish that they're eating, and the what a hard life people had. And they also really welcome the fact that we do highlight the role of the women in the industry, and the vital role that they played.
No, that should never be forgotten. My goodness, my old grandmother on my father's side, she was. I mean, I can just picture her. My goodness, she would be in a boat in the harbour and doing all the work things they would do. No rubber gloves, no
No.
protection, just bare hands. And about salt when they were salting fish, and about baiting
Mhm.
hooks and stuff like that. No, no, it's hard. Well, is there a feeling that you feel that you or you hope that visitors will leave with after walking through the museum? Or if you said it,
I hope they'll understand more about the industry and the fact that it's not the fishing industry. It's many different fishing industries, and obviously they change over time. But I hope that they would have a respect for the people who built the industry, and who underpin it to this day. Um, but I also hope that they would also see the kind of the positives of the industry and how it's inspired people as well. Because a lot of what we have on display are things like, well, we've spoken about poetry, and we have examples of poetry on display. We have wonderful artworks on display, and people who have really taken inspiration from the fishing community and the fishing industry and its culture, and then use that to as a spur for creativity. So it's not we're not trying to um, kind of batter people over the head with all the doom and gloom behind it. It's also a story of innovation, adaptation to economic changes, environmental changes, industrial changes. It's a story of entrepreneurship and resilience, I suppose, and also of that strong community culture and traditions that are then inspiring for other people.
I always thought as well, Linda, thinking back, fishermen, maybe on this one only, particularly skippers, when they were in, I mean, they had anything between five and maybe seven men that they were responsible for, and they were, had to be mindful of looking after. uh, And if they got in a situation with bad weather or something going wrong or that, what an inbuilt confidence they must have had and strength to come through anything like that.
I think so. Yes, I think so. Although, I mean, you'll know this better than me, but probably they would be the last to admit it, and they
Oh,
would just said, "Oh
always.
yeah, well that's just the job," I just got on with it. But
I asked, I remember asking, there was a particular bad weather now, Helmsdale, or my home village, it was on the east coast, so any wind, gales, anything, bad weather, easterly or southeasterly or that was really bad. And I've seen the water, white water, just breaking from end to end in the bay. And here our boat come in one day, and my uncle was skipping. And I says to him, "How on earth did you manage to get in with that weather?" And he says, "No bother, no bother." He says, "We hadn't a bother." He says, "I had the coal shovel. I was able to keep the water out." I would say it was breaking over them.
there you go, resourcefulness. That's that's
Oh,
that's what you need.
absolutely. Yeah. How within well, it's like your artifacts and your what you've got there. How would you say you could see in the not exhibition, the museum, life in fishing communities has changed over the past century.
I would say that the biggest change has been the increase in mechanization and the increases in technology. Um, because, yeah, I mean, the last century, we're going back to the 1920s. So, 1920s, you still had sailing boats. Um, I mean, obviously there were steam drifters and there was steam trawlers, and motorboats as well coming in. But it was all very much um, powered by human hand. I mean, there were some winches and haulers and so on, but compared with modern vessels with all the hydraulics and the power blocks and all of that and the shelter decks, and it's
Yeah,
much more physical, and much more to do with reading charts and reading, um, rather than a GPS system that does it all for you. And so it's the same. In some ways, it's the same techniques that are being used. It's the same or very similar. I mean, obviously, net technology has changed as well, but you're still putting a net around some fish and hauling them out of the sea one way or another. But that's the same. But it's how that is done is very different. And I think that's really interesting because, just thinking for myself, um, I think it's much easier for people to get a grasp of, and maybe going back to your earlier point about people not understanding what fishing is nowadays, it's much easier to get a grasp of things if they can see how they work. So if you look at an old fashioned hauler or something like that, you can see the gear wheels, you can see, oh, the rope goes through that way and you pull it and that's how it works. Or even somebody's got an engine in their car, if you can see the bits that are moving, you can see how it all works together and what it's for and how it does what it's meant to do. Whereas now everything's all enclosed and it's all hidden away, and you plug it into a computer and the computer diagnoses the problem for you. Or if you're trying to plot a course, you put the coordinates into your GPS and it gets you where you're going to go, rather than, right, have I got the map the right way up, and what's the. So I think it's much more difficult to kind of get a handle on things when it's all electronic.
yeah,
But actually showing people those older methods that were in use 100 years ago, 50 years ago, they can actually see the workings. And I think that really helps people to understand what's going on and why it's important and why it needs to be done. And also why these guys who were doing it were so good at what they did, and needed to be, because they had to run a business as a fishing vessel, and they needed to be good at navigating, and they needed to be good at all the mechanical stuff, and they needed to be good at finding the fish, and also reading the markets and all of that side of things. So yeah, it's so multifaceted.
when you were talking there, remember exact words, but you were talking about wheels, and
Yeah.
uh, it's reminded me of what I would say in our family. It's a real funny story, Linda. It's gone back. It was gone back to the what I said earlier, the Kelvin 88, and they were in with a problem. It's a gearbox problem, and the wheel, the there's teeth on them, and that engages them,
Yeah.
and dogs called them, and they had a problem with this, so they're looking at it, and no, we're going to need to get an engineer. So they got my father's their their father, so that's was my grandfather. They got him and says, "Look, go up and phone Shepherd's Engineers, who are the engineering company in Wick. Who he says we're needing to get them down because." And he says, just tell them the big dog is going over the small dog and it's just smashing its teeth. And it's just breaking its teeth, so it's no engaging. So my grandfather goes up. He goes up to the house. You'll remember. I'm sure you'll remember this. So he dials. Hello. She says, "Hello. Can I help?" Yeah. He says, it's the My Sodas. He says in Helmsdale. He says, "We're needing you to have a look." He says the big dogs are going over the top of the small dogs and smashing their teeth. And the woman came back and says to him, "I'm really sorry about your dogs, but can you tell me what number you're wanting?" It was the operator he was talking. Has any of our traditions survived, and do you feel maybe some of them have disappeared?
Yeah, I mean that's a quite a broad sweeping question. Undoubtedly, there's traditions that have disappeared, but yeah, some of them survive. I mean, there's quite a lot of well, you'll know this as well, superstitions within the fishing community.
Oh, yeah.
Things, words that are not to be said, and things that are not to be the wrong color aboard a boat. And I think there is still some of that. We are restored Fifey, the Reaper. There are certainly words that are not to be said aboard the Reaper. And woe betide anyone who starts whistling a tune, which I think is a very old tradition to avoid whistling up a wind while you're at sea.
Right.
I mean, looking at more recent traditions, that there was a time when all the harbours had their gala days, and I think some of them are struggling now. And it was really lovely a few years back that Cellardyke Sea Queen was revived, so that was quite an interesting one, because it had fallen out of kind of current use, but it was revived. So I think it depends. I mean, each small community has its own practices and traditions, and it's again difficult to say what is a tradition that belongs to the fishing industry and what is a local.
Did you find
custom.
with that superstitions, Linda? Sometimes you didn't. It was okay to speak the word as long as you weren't on board the boat.
Yeah,
Or
I've heard of that.
Is that
I've
just
heard of that.
areas?
I've heard of that, but I've also heard of places where you just weren't allowed to say the words at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, other words were used. We have a room in the museum with it's got a small window in it that's got a design made out of sea glass, and it shows a salmon, but that was never called the salmon room. It was always called the redfish room.
Yeah.
And that's that's a common translation for the term.
I've heard it coal iron. I've heard it pink fish, red fish. Yeah. But never salmon.
No.
Yeah.
But we've got some really quite interesting objects in the collection. Thinking about customs and traditions and superstitions, we've got a small child's leather shoe that was hidden in the chimney of a house, and that was to keep the witches out, because it was used as a decoy, and that's quite a common thing, not just in fishing communities, but kind of late 18th, 19th century, where you would, if bad spirits or witches were looking for the people in the house, if you hid an item of clothing in a chimney where they might get in, or by a window or a door, they would enchant that instead of going for the person. They would be decoyed. So that's quite an interesting item in the collection.
Did we use a real strong tradition with us? If somebody passed away and there was came to the funeral, woman would never go to the graveyard,
Yeah. Yeah.
ever. In fact, my own sister says we still with, not that she's wanting to keep with the tradition, but she's frightened to think what her father would think of it if she did go. So she'll go to the service, she'll go to the house and things like that, but she'll just not go to the graveyard.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I've heard of that one as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and a woman, he never would there be allowed on a boat, on the fishing boat. I was in Scrubster one day, not that long ago, and there was a young lad on board, and his girlfriend and her pal. They were down in the in Scrubster on the boat, and I was just standing in the quay thinking back, and I thought, oh, thank goodness my father's not seen that.
But you see, these things go around because there's going way back. It was the boats that used to take the women to go and gut the herring before they went by train or other ways of traveling. Um, have you ever read the Christian Watt papers? That was
Oh,
written by a woman called Christian Watt. She lived in Broadsea, up near Fraserburgh, and
all
she
right.
was remembering the 1840s.
Take a note of
And
that.
she's got some fantastic stories, and she's got some really strong opinions on many things. But absolutely fascinating character and fascinating life, and a really hard life. She lost a lot of her relatives at sea. They were all fishing, but she remembered going on her father's boat to the west coast to catch. I think it was cod they were catching in the season, and the women went on the boat, and then they stayed in huts by the shore, and they would cure the fish that the men caught. Lay them out on the shingle and dry
Wow.
them, and then they would go on the boat back. And then, as I say, later on, it was when the first boats from Cellardike actually that went down to Great Yarmouth and started off that East Anglian kind of herring trip. The women went on the boats before they started chartering trains and things like that. And of
Yeah.
course, now you get female fishers.
Yeah.
So
Oh, I
it's
think it's
it's all
fantastic. Yeah. Just, yeah, there were, I think maybe the fishermen in the past, like my father's era and before that, and that, they were just men of their time.
yeah. But it was very gendered though, because we tell the story of how important the women were to the fishing industry, but they had their distinct roles. They were preparing the gear, and they were processing the
Yeah.
catch, and they were selling the catch as fishwives as well. But in that period, kind of 19th century period, it was very gendered. You wouldn't have caught them actually fishing on board a boat.
But even then, when I'm thinking, I mean, we would have seen me many a time taking a lorry load of fish to the Lake of Aberdeen, and my goodness, just some factories, there would just be rows and rows of women filleters and real characters,
Yeah.
brilliant characters. Do you know of any misconceptions you have about the Scottish fishing heritage?
I think people don't realise how much goes into it. I think, I mean, it's an easy mistake to make if you don't know. Then why would you know that there was a difference between the inshore fishing industry and the boats and the different fishing methods that people use, and the offshore, maybe the large scale fishing industry. I think it's it's getting back to that story of complexity and nuance, and I don't think that's widely understood. And the fact that, you've got some fishermen who they have a boat and it's just them, and they go out on a daily basis or whatever, and they're fishing from their home port. And then you've got, these vast pelagic trawlers off that work out of Shetland, and just, are a completely different scale. And then everything in between. And I think that's maybe not quite understood by
Yeah.
people outside of the industry, just how many different aspects there are and how complex it can be. And the fact that that a lot of the fishing is done by people just running their own business and owning their own boat and fishing and doing it all themselves, and it's not all big companies.
Mm-hmm. Is there any single artifacts in the museum that could grab the attention of most visitors?
I think that would have to be the largest object that we have on show, which is our Zulu, the
Oh, yeah.
research. And that's a full-size vessel that's within the museum. We have a number of full-size vessels in the museum, but most of them are, smaller, kind of inshore boats, or even smaller than that, creel boats. But the research is a massive vessel, built in 1903 and fished till 1968, and built as a sailing Zulu, and then later motorized. And now, unfortunately, all that we have left is the hull. We have some of the equipment that came off her, but in some ways that makes her even more impressive for people, because when you come in the gallery, you come in at ground level, and you're kind of walking outside of the hull of the boat, and then the route takes you up and around until you're kind of standing looking down inside the hull, and you can see the construction. And I always think it's absolutely astonishing to think that those massive oak frames were shaped by hand tools. And because when she was built, that's how they would have built her, with hand tools, and then obviously the planking. And as curator, I have had the opportunity to go down inside the hull, which the visitors unfortunately don't. And when you're standing on the keel and you're looking up, just the sheer scale of it is just absolutely amazing.
Yeah, it's brilliant. That's brilliant. Are there stories told behind the exhibit?
We always try and tell stories. So with the research, we were lucky enough that her last cruise, because she was built in the northeast, and then she went up to Shetland and spent most of her working life in Shetland. We were lucky that some of her last crew were still alive when she was donated to the museum, so we got their stories. And her engineer, Gibby Williamson in particular, left a good amount of stories of fishing trips in her, and so we try and share those with the visitors, because, as I say, that's what brings the boat to life. Without that, she's still an amazing object, but it's difficult to picture when she's sitting inside the museum how she would have behaved out at sea. And I think that
Yeah.
that human element is important to give that flavour.
Is there any artifacts that best show the skills and ingenuity of Scottish fishermen?
Again, that's a really difficult one, because there's so many.
Yeah.
It's
Maybe the one you just mentioned.
Yeah, maybe the one I just mentioned. Do you know what? I mean, it's such a silly, simple thing, but the nets are kind of little works of art in themselves, I find. And if you watch somebody mending a net, and you're from a fishing community, you'll be thinking, what's she talking about? Well, that obviously people can mend nets. But if you're not from a fishing community and you see somebody just, they take some twine and they've got their net needle and their hands move so fast you can't even see what they're doing. And suddenly there's a hole where there was a hole, there's no hole, and then you can't even see where the mend was because they've got the gauge completely right, the mesh size is completely right, the knots are as neat as anything, and you think that's just skill, that's just hand and eye and years of practice. It's muscle memory, and it's just, again, what we were talking about before. Here's a problem, I need to solve it, I'll just get on and do it. And they just do it. But to anybody looking outside, you think, oh, okay, that's something that I wouldn't know how to do. And there's just so many different little, almost silly examples like that just come from those years of working within an industry from that individual, and also the generations stretching back that mean that, that was just around in their kind of family DNA almost to kind of pick up and run with.
Yeah. I mean, let's face it, fishing was central to places like Anstruther, Pitton, Weem, and the East Nuke villages.
Absolutely.
I mean, St. Monans, the boat I've been talking about, our family boat, that was built in St. Monans.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And what a great reputation Miller's had. If it was a Miller,
Absolutely.
if it was a Miller's boat, it was a good one.
Mm-hmm. And they sent boats all over the world. Yeah. But then even more recently than that, a couple of guys that I was lucky enough to know and were here as trustees. I'm sure you'll know the names David Todd and David Smith.
Yeah.
And they were both real innovators in the fishing industry, as regards machinery and the design of the boats and adopting new technology and new ways of fishing. Because they were, entrepreneurs and mechanically minded and wanting to see how they could advance things.
My response to that, Linda, would be, do you mean the Davy Smith?
I do. Argonaut.
Argonaut, my goodness, what a name he made for himself. Good fisherman.
Yeah.
But in fairness to that, guys, as well, a good fisherman, I mentioned good fisherman there. Norrie Bremner up here is of the same character with the boy Andrew. And that story goes on now. His son Andrew and his grandson are now just as successful. But when I say that, I don't mean because they caught the boss fish. There's more to it than that. They were mindful of the future, and they just didn't want to catch everything. In fact, I would elaborate on that. I would say I'm in my 70s now. I've been in the fishing industry pretty much all my life. I've never yet met the fisherman who goes to sea to catch the last of any species.
No. I think the fishermen that I have met have all come from generations of fishermen, and they would wish for there to be generations going forward as well. I don't think, there aren't as many people going into the fishing, and that's a really complicated story about regulation and resources and technology and all sorts of different factors, and that's where it's quite a challenge, and it's also quite a good thing to be a museum of a living industry. And long may we be a museum of a living industry, but it does mean that things are changing now, and we have to try and keep up with that, as well as, preserving the history of the past. But it is a period of change. Well, it's probably anybody at any point in history would tell you it's a period of change, to be fair.
Yeah.
But no, I agree. The fishermen that I speak to would all want to see a future for the industry as well.
Yeah, yeah. But even with the different styles, as you say, just what you mentioned there, I remember my father used to tell me, and how when there were still steam and they would have coal, on board. He said there were fantastic seaboats. They were always great ballast because the way he put it, they would be sailing out what the fishing grounds with coal,
Ah,
and they would be
yes,
coming back full of fish. So the stability and were great seaboats, and they used what they had.
absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. Do you feel younger visitors appreciate how demanding and dangerous fishing once was?
I think it's difficult because it's changed so much, and life has changed so much. Um, even between my childhood and my children's childhood, it's just so many things have changed, and it's difficult to get a grasp of. We try to convey some of these things, and we try to um, tell the stories and convey the information in different ways at different levels, so that the kids who come either with their families or with school groups or whatever can take away a bit more of an understanding. And we've actually worked on a couple of projects, specifically around how hard life was at sea, and we've got some sort of interactives that we use. We've got it's our version of being resourceful and using the things to hand. We have a waste paper, but it's basically it's like a laundry basket that we've rigged up with straps, and we get the kids to carry a load of bean bags as if they were fishwives carrying a load of fish, and we kind of adjust the weight of the bean bags to be proportionate to the child's weight, and just kind of, right, okay, we'll load you up with bean bags. Now you walk along there and see how it would have been to carry that load. And it's just, daft examples like that, but just to try and convey some of the physicality of it all. I mean, one of the great things that we can do with the school groups actually is, if they can get aboard the Reaper, either in Anstruther, or if she's able to get up to, she was at Macduff earlier this year, and we get the school groups on board, and then they get the experience of going down the ladder into the hold and getting into the cabin and climbing into the bunks, and they'll all get on the end of a rope and raise the sails up, and that, I think, is much more immersive experience, and they do get a bit more of an insight that way. So that's really useful, because I think it's difficult otherwise to just get an understanding of
Yeah.
the physical aspects of that hard way of life.
Yeah. And how much of the museum's knowledge comes from oral history or people telling their own stories? Must be brilliant in them when you get people like that.
It is, and we are very lucky that we did have volunteers in the past who would interview people, and obviously we can do the same now. But it's great to have those stories captured from the past. And actually, one of the combinations that we found really worked well was we had a couple of volunteers who would go and do interviews together, and one of them was a member of the fishing community and had been a skipper and a fisherman, and the other one was not. So the fisherman could speak to the whoever they were interviewing about the fishing aspects, and he knew which questions to ask, and he knew what they were talking about, and could understand where they were going, and that side of things. But the person who didn't know, the volunteer who wasn't from the fishing community, could say, "Hang on a minute, what do you mean by that?" And can you go over that bit a bit more for me, because the danger is that you've got people who know what they're talking about speaking to somebody else who knows exactly what they're talking about, and there's a lot of assumptions made about what people know, and then people like me come in 20 years later and think, I have no idea what they're talking about, because they know what they're talking about, but they haven't explained it for somebody coming from outside.
Yeah.
So yeah,
From a non-fishing background.
exactly. I mean, and yeah, so yeah, it's great to have the stories, but you have to ask the right questions as well.
Yeah, that's fantastic. What is the most memorable, would you say, conversation you've had with, say, an old fisherman or a family member?
Again, that's a difficult one because, well, as I was saying, just this afternoon, I had a really fantastic conversation with a chap who brought his Gansey in.
Yeah, that'll do. That's good. I don't set too high bar, and I'm fortunate, or maybe we're fortunate here, because I'm old enough to remember just how important Ganseys were.
Yeah, exactly, and all the different variations.
My goodness, there was some weight in them.
Aye, yes, yeah. I imagine when they got wet, they weren't quite so comfortable.
Yeah. Oh, that's for sure. And unfortunate, that's what was a problem for them if they did just say they went overboard, or that
Yeah,
that didn't help them.
no,
The weight of their ganses and things like that pulling, soaking up the water. Are there stories that would have been lost forever if they hadn't been recorded in time, do you feel, in the museum?
definitely so. Speaking about our two volunteers, a lot of the interviews that they did were around the time of we've had recently, over the recent decades or so, we've had quite a lot of big anniversaries of World War One and World War Two. So obviously the people that they were interviewing didn't have memories of World War One, but they did have a lot of memories of World War Two. And that was something that our earlier interviewees hadn't asked about, and whether that was because they didn't think to ask about it, or whether it was because there was still people were still sensitive about talking about it then when they were speaking to them. So we managed to get quite a lot of details, interesting details about people's wartime experience. And obviously since then a number of our interviewees have passed away, and we would have completely missed those stories had we not captured them at that point.
Yeah, that's fantastic that you have that.
Yeah.
And how do you feel from your research that the importance, or how important were the things like gutting yards, curing yards, markets, and family businesses to the success of the industry and the fleet?
Well, yeah, I'd say that the onshore aspect of the industry is as important as the boats themselves, because there's no point in catching the fish if you then can't get the fish to market. And in the old, pre-refrigeration and freezing, the only way you were going to do that was either to get it to your local markets by physically taking it there as fresh as possible, or by curing it. And so the vast majority of people who had tasted fish, it would have been cured fish, who, if they weren't living by the coast themselves. So all of that infrastructure was vital. and not just for the fish processing, the gutting yards, as you say, and the factories, and the transport infrastructure, but also things like the oilskin manufacturers and the net makers and the boat builders and rope walks as well. It's it's interesting how little of that architecture survives now, and it has all been centralised. You've got it's all mass produced now. Quite often not in the UK as well. So it's that again. That's another aspect of the industry which is much more hidden away than it used to be.
Yeah, yeah. Do you see a role for museums to help bridge the gap between fishing communities and the wider public?
Definitely, definitely, and I think that's what I see my own role as, because as somebody coming in from outside, I can kind of be that bridge between the industry where people have lived it and know it absolutely intimately, and then the vast majority of our visitors whose interaction with fish is either a fish finger out of the freezer or their fish supper, or it might be a tin of tuna or something like that, and they haven't really thought about it. So that's where the museum is I think really important in communicating, and finding those little stories that will bring people in and draw them in, and to realize, oh, actually there's a whole aspect to this industry that I wasn't even thinking about, and it's because they've fallen in love with the art of a particular artist who painted the fishing industry, or because of their interest in Ganses, or because of their interest in engines and engineering, and that's what's drawn them in. And then, because of that translation piece that we can do as a museum, we can give them the context and say, well, all of this is part of a really important industry and culture that was really vibrant in Scotland and still is really important within Scotland. But you didn't know it was here, but now we can tell you about it. And then hopefully when they leave the museum, they're going out with a new appreciation, and also maybe not with more, well, hopefully with a few more answers, but maybe also with just a few more questions, and thinking, oh, I'd never thought about that before. I'm going to find out about that a little bit more, and just awaken their curiosity. I mean, some
Yeah,
of our visitors obviously are incredibly knowledgeable, and we get a lot of visitors who have a personal connection to some of the objects and the items on display. So that's where the research is a great example, because we get a lot of visitors from Shetland who come specifically because we have that boat and they have a family connection with that boat. We have another boat in the museum, the Lively Hope, who was based in Kenzie, and again we get people who come to visit that boat. I mean, it's almost like visiting a family member. And Fraserburgh as well, with the links to the Reaper. So there are people who come to the museum who know an awful lot and bring that knowledge with them. And then you hear the family groups going around and saying, oh, well, that's the sort of thing that your granny used to do, and that's what your granddad used to do. So they've got that knowledge. So it's also looking after their interests, but being understandable to visitors who've got no background in it whatsoever and who are coming to it all fresh.
I'm just thinking of another story my father told me, Linda, about museum. It's going way, way back. It was just after the war, and they were fishing in the Murray Firth, up close to here, and they were listening to two boats from Lossiemouth. Now, if you could picture, Helmsdale is in the north side of the Murray Firth, Lossiemouth is in the south, so they fished close to each other a lot. And he told me the story about how there was haddock at that time. It's very scarce, really scarce. obviously the boats weren't catching them. And one boat called the other, saying, "Have you hauled yet? Have you hauled the net yet?" "Yes, they've hauled." He says, "You see any haddock?" And the skipper came back to him and says, "The next haddock you'll see is in a glass case in a museum."
Yeah. I don't know if it's a haddock, but it's not in a glass case. The dried fish hanging up. It's lost its head. But
Well,
yeah,
thankfully, they are still catching in abundance, but that just shows how cyclical fishing is, and it can take off and come on. And are you working on any future projects now that have you excited?
well, we've got our exhibition program is always changing. So we've got planning for our autumn exhibition at the moment, which is actually quite exciting. We're partnering with the Royal Scottish Academy. It's their 200th anniversary. So they've got museums around the country are borrowing items from them to display. So we've got an art exhibition on the works of John Bellany, who obviously grew up in a fishing community in Port Seaton. And we've got two of his works in our collection, one of which has never been displayed. And we're borrowing some more from the RSA. Another one has never been, to my knowledge, publicly displayed. So that'll be quite interesting for folk to see, and something a bit different. And alongside of that, we've just had our Safety at Sea gallery repainted. So I will be updating the displays in there. And that's where we talk about, obviously, the dangers of fishing and how fishermen can and have kept themselves safe over the years. And going back to our earlier conversation, looking at some of the superstitions and the way that people used to keep themselves safe at sea before they had all the technological advances. So that will be being changed over the autumn and winter period as well.
What sort of timing is there, for fishing gear, modern, what we call modern gear, modern boats, just stuff you have, the collection you have just now? When do you start feeling, well, that's for the museum and the next generation? When does that sort of kick in?
It's a difficult one. I mean, some of the things that we have are actual, prototypes. Like we've got the lobster creel that was a new design, and we got it when it was new, kind of thing. So we do try to keep up with things, but a lot of the boats are a lot bigger than we've got space to collect.
Yeah.
So the way we get around that is that we've got models on display. So we'll kind of talk about the evolution of the design of boats and the equipment, and the safety features and the mechanical and the navigation equipment and communication equipment, etc. And we'll use model boats to talk about that, because you can't really collect fishing boats forever. Otherwise,
Yeah.
we'll start to take over the entire harbour. But no, it's a tricky one, and obviously, when things are happening, when you're in the midst of things happening, it's difficult to see what things are going to stand the test of time and what things are going to be historically important in
Yeah.
the future. So it's a little bit harder to know what to hang on to, but it is something that we try to keep an eye on. And
You are very much a specialist museum. That must be pretty much an endless challenge. Preserve maritime collections in the long term.
yes, yeah, I mean, I'm not quite sure how we're going to collect things like like some of the software that's used on board now. I mean, some of that, the really high tech stuff. Hopefully that will be a problem for my successors to deal with. But hopefully there, as I say, there's challenges, but it's also interesting because it keeps the story fresh and it keeps it relevant to people, and it's a good position to be in, to be a museum of a living industry. And we try to keep our connections and try to keep oral history, for example. Interviewing people who are working in the industry now is a way of capturing that as well as the physical objects.
Yeah. And as a museum piece got to be history, got to be old,
No.
or not necessarily. No.
No, we had, for our 50th anniversary, that was in 2019, we had an exhibition, and we divided the year in two, and the first half of the year we looked back 50 years to all the changes that had happened in the lifetime of the museum to that point. And in the second half of the year, we had an exhibition that was looking forward 50 years and seeing, well, what are the challenges going to be to the fishing industry in the next 50 years? And that was really, really interesting. And we spoke to some people who work in the industry, people, fisheries scientists, some of the people behind the kind of the new latest fishing gear and technology. And that was really interesting to try and predict, well, what are the issues going to be, and what are the challenges going to be, and how are they going to be resolved? What are the trends that people are seeing? As I say, it's not quite so easy because you haven't got that luxury of distance from the subject matter, but it's very interesting.
If I could ask you personally, after spending this time immersed in the fishing, Scotland's fishing heritage, what has surprised you, and has your view of fishermen changed since becoming curator?
Well, I didn't have much knowledge of fishermen before I became curator, so that's an easy one to answer. Yes, yeah, yes. I mean, obviously I grew up on the east coast of Scotland, so I did encounter the fishing community and people who worked within it, but it was, yeah, my knowledge, as I imagine many of our visitors' knowledge is still, was very basic. And I think the more I get to learn about it, and the more I get to know how the industry worked and still works, I think it's just an admiration for the people who make it happen, because a lot of them are just doing it themselves. I mean, obviously part of a community and part of and the fishing support organizations have a big role to play, but a lot of them are working for and by themselves. And as a consumer going to the supermarket, you wouldn't realize that. You wouldn't think there's all these complicated links in a chain that reach back to that point.
Yeah.
And then, yes, it's how do you convey that to other people? I think people who visit the museum do gain an understanding of that.
And do you
But
feel
it's difficult.
anything in our industry that fishing industry has contributed to Scotland that is still not maybe fully recognised?
Again, with the big questions. Yeah, I mean, there's so many different ways to answer that question. The economics, the importance of fishing. Well, going back to talking about the wartime, fish was not rationed during the war, and the fishermen kept fishing. I mean, obviously, some of them were called up for service and made a huge impact to defending the coasts through minesweeping and all of the duties that they took on for the Royal Naval Reserve. But also they kept fishing, and in those straitened times, I think that was a key contribution to the war effort, and I don't know if that's widely understood, or even thought about.
If a younger person is listening today to us who knows really nothing about the fishing industry, what one thing would you want him to remember? You know, funny when I say that, Linda, and I don't want to make it sound as if I'm jumping in and answering my own question. I think I think you have the answer in your book, the title of your book,
Yes, yeah,
Real Price of Fish.
that's it. Yeah, yeah. It's the human endeavor that goes into putting the fish on people's plates. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. If just say our listeners, some of our listeners today have never visited the museum, what experience do you hope they will come for, and what feelings would you like them to leave with?
Well, first of all, I would tell them it's a lot bigger than it looks from the outside. So give yourself enough time, because there's a lot to see, and lots of interesting things to see, and lots of interactive things for kids to do as they go around as well. Because we do, as I said before, we do think it's quite good for children to learn through doing things, as well as just reading text panels and looking at things. I would hope that people would come in looking for a good day out, a good family day out. Lots of things that they will find that will be talking points, that will surprise them, that will tell them more about an industry that they maybe didn't know so much about, or if they've got a history in the fishing industry, there'll be things that they recognise, and they can point to, similar things being in their own homes, or their grandparents' homes, or whatever. And when they leave the museum, I hope that they would leave with some answers to some questions, and maybe some more curiosity about other things that they can explore a little bit further. We've got displays that cover the technical aspects of how fish are actually caught out of the sea, the fish themselves and how they live, the culture, the traditions, the people who made up the fishing community. There's lots of different strands to it. We can't possibly exhaust all of those strands within a single museum visit. So I would hope that there will be something there that any visitor would find that would pique their interest, and that they could go and explore further, once they've left us. And they can do that. We've got lots of resources on our website. We've got our photographic library on our website, which is fantastic. We're adding to that with the help of volunteers. We've got learning resources, little summaries of our exhibitions, our events programs, and so on. So there's lots for people to look at once they've been to the museum as well, if they want to follow up on
Yeah,
various things.
excellent, excellent. One of the story when you were talking about wartime and that, I just remembered. I just thought back our my own family. I just thought, and my cousin is quite a bit older than me. He's 90, and I often say to him, it must have been such an exciting place just after the war, and that's when the father and his brothers, they got the boat from St. Bonans. What an exciting village it must have been. And thinking from my granny and granda's point of view, they had five sons, volunteered, went off, spent their time in the Navy, and the five of them came back
Wow,
and got the boat and started fishing. That must be fantastic.
absolutely. Yeah.
Where can our listeners follow the museum activities online?
We've got our website, www.scottfishmuseum.org, and we're also on Facebook, X, and Instagram, and LinkedIn as well. So that's where to keep up. The Facebook, X, and Instagram are where we publish all of our activity programs, our exhibitions, and any details of things that are coming up. So that's where to look for that up-to-date information.
Brilliant. Fantastic. Linda, I'd just like to say thanks for your time today. It's been a real pleasure. I've loved it.
No, thank you. It's been interesting to hear your stories as well.